Yeah, all right. So I'm the One off Van Halen 1. Yeah, one of my favorite tunes. I got to grab my guitar stand. It's way off camera. I got to bring it close. All right, well, thanks for dropping in for another version of Elton's 15 here. I'm Elton. Welcome. And so I've been sort of cataloging what is Alex Van Halen's book, chapter by chapter here. We're in chapter 5 for this edition. And it's the book about Eddie Van Halen, written by his brother Alex Van Halen, called Brothers. And chapter 5 is interesting because it starts with sort of a quote from David Lee Roth. Actually, it's a passage from David Lee Roth talking about, of all things, flyers. Now, flyers are things that seem to be, well, I mean, they still exist, obviously, but if you were a band in the mid to late 70s, advertisement for your shows were essentially through flyers. You would have them made up, copied, and then you'd hand them out wherever you could, or stick them up on the telephone poles, or put them on car windshields, just anywhere you could, local high schools, local schools, and that's what they did. So that chapter 5 again opens with Roth kind of explaining their flyering process, which they would have like teams. They'd use walkie-talkies because they would be very strategic when they put these things out. And so if a big band was coming into the area to play, he cites Aerosmith, Roth does, at least in this passage, for the flyers. And they go and pretty much go to the parking lots and just start flyering every single car. And because they're with teams and they have walkie-talkies, if one of the teams was stopped by police, the other teams knew to go into sort of hyperdrive or overdrive to try to promote the up-and-coming shows. So that's pretty interesting. Alex goes on to speak about how tight he, Dave, and Ed were at this point in time, that they ate together, they drank together, they hung out together, they went to go see shows together, and that they were really one, right? They were a complete unit. He also talks about scouring the Pasadena area for floodlights, right? In order to have yourself a light show, as a band, you provided your own lights. And part of providing your own lights is having the resources to secure those lights. So going from different neighborhoods, just eyeballing what could possibly be a light that you would use in your show later on down the line is something that they actively engaged in. So they would, essentially just steal them and use them in their shows. Pretty interesting. He goes on to talk about, as far as like, in terms of them hanging out, with recreational drug use, I guess Dave and Ed kind of bonded with that in terms of marijuana use. And Al just could not hang with marijuana. It just it affected him. He couldn't play very well with it. Where he did bond with Dave was through martial arts, and that they would go, I guess, train together to a degree. They used to go see karate tournaments at a place called the Olympic Auditorium. And he said Dave was kind of funny because he'd kind of hold court while the tournament was happening with whoever's around him, and give them, whoever the collective that was sitting near Dave, I guess, would get maybe a history lesson or a bunch of sort of background knowledge on it. And Al thought it was pretty entertaining because he said a lot of it was sort of baloney, but it sounded good, and Dave was able to entertain even within that arena of non-music, which it sounds right up Dave's alley. He goes on to talk about how Dave had an incredible work ethic, that his dad was loaded, rich. I don't think Dave grew up rich, but he certainly saw the fruits of some of his dad's eye surgeon stuff a little bit later on, when he was a little bit older. They had moved around for a bit, and I guess being born in Indiana, David Lee Roth was, and then moving to Massachusetts while his dad did schooling and residency as an eye surgeon, an ophthalmologist. he said, Dave, I guess when they met, Dave kind of had money, but it didn't act like he had money, didn't act like a rich kid. I can remember Dave Lee Roth having to shovel horse manure in order to pay for a stereo system. And it's interesting that Al kind of points out that he did not behave rich, because I can remember, older interviews from just, I don't know what sources, just growing up and hearing that Dave had some money growing up. And there's definitely a taboo around rock bands and who came from affluent backgrounds and who was really kind of got the street cred. And it seems as though Dave was able to sort of escape that label of having the affluent background and being more from the street, even though he kind of had it somewhat padded a little bit later on in his adolescence with his dad finally making money and being out of school and actually being the eye surgeon. He contrasts that with he and Ed, Alan and Ed, not having anything, and they were at a kind of a constant struggle to try to compensate, always a hustle. And it boiled right down to Ed's guitar, the Frankenstein guitar, the red, white, and black one, the one that originally, I got one of his versions of it, the EVH one, several years ago. Saved that for that one. Great guitar, really, really great for rock, really, which is what I play. But he said that the Frankenstein guitar is a reflection of that background, right? Not having much and making do with what you have. And it then goes into an Ed passage where he's talking about how he had to get every last squeak and squeal out of a guitar because he couldn't afford effects for the guitar, pedals, things that would change the sound of the guitar. And it all kind of stems from that, not being able to afford much. And then it kind of goes into beyond the music stuff, talking about Ed's car at the time when they were playing shows, at least on the club level, where Ed's car door was literally held on by a piano wire string, just really, really not having much. And then the chapter then morphs into the introduction of Michael Anthony and their chance meeting where Snake, which was the name of Michael Anthony's band, of which Michael Anthony played bass and was lead singer, were playing the same venue as Van Halen. I think they were opening up for Van Halen. And Van Halen's PA had issues and trouble, and so Michael Anthony offered his PA. It seems to be a theme here with PAs. You think about David Lee Roth being able to get in the band because he owned a PA, and instead of renting it from him, just get him in the band, although much more than that. And then Michael Anthony, it was an issue with the PA, and Mike saying, hey, here's, you guys, no problem, play through ours. And that put them on a good level. And I can remember interviews that go beyond the book where Ed remembers seeing Michael playing with Snake. Man, this guy is a really, really great player, and he sings too. This guy's the complete package. But Al talks about the performance that he saw Snake playing where they were opening for Van Halen and not being so impressed necessarily. Like he cites one song where they were covering ZZ Top's LaGrange. And if you know that song, Billy Gibbons, the guitar player and singer for ZZ Top, during that song, his voice kind of sounds like this, drops his voice down and stuff. And Al said that Michael Anthony's girlfriend would go up stage and pitch his nose so it would change the pitch of his voice for that song. And Al thought it was like a desecration of the stage. The stage is like this holy spot. It's sacred. How dare you have someone who's not a musician during the show go up there and do that? I thought that was pretty funny. But anyways, they ended up eventually inviting Mike down for a jam, and that Mike came down with his little brother. Al go on to say that he's really, really nice guy, and he could sing, and also was able to run the performance lights. So when they're playing, they had a foot pedal kind of stuff where you'd step on certain buttons with your feet that would trigger light colors or lights on and off, and Mike was able to do that. And so he was the all-around guy, right? Played bass solid, really great guy, vocals, harmonies phenomenal, and also could run lights. So win all the way around. And talking about Michael Anthony's harmonies, Al goes into a little bit of detail in how important they are to the sound and how they blended with Ed's. It seems as though Mike, he, in smaller circles, gets the credit for being part of the fabric of that classic Van Halen sound. If you take his voice out of the mix of that classic Van Halen, this is my own opinion, it just would not be the same. And that's easy to say, but the sound quality of what makes Van Halen so, for me, likable and enjoyable to listen to is hearing that blend of the vocals with Michael Anthony's being very, very prominent. It is a defining marker for this band. And I don't think there's enough being said about that historically. And I could go on and on about that right now, but it's just so integral for their overall sound. A super important piece. Anyway, so they now have the lineup. They've got the four characters, just like Al says in the book, just like Led Zeppelin. Well, while they're kind of playing the clubs at this time, it's I wouldn't say a battle, but they have to keep their mother and Al on a level, like, okay, we're trying to be respectable. We're going to go to college. So they went to a junior college called Pasadena City College, and it was there that they took some music classes. I think they were all there: Michael Anthony, Dave Lee Roth, Ed, and Al. And they took like a scoring class with a guy by the name of Truman Fisher, who, by claim of fame here, also was a professor that taught Frank Zappa. And I think the biggest thing they learned from him was, if it sounds good, it is good. And that is something historically you'd always hear Ed say, and occasionally he would cite that college professor from Pasadena Civic College with that. But he went on to say that anyways, just as part of his interviewing process, when he would just be talking about music. If it is good, it is good. It doesn't matter how it is or whether it does this or that, fits into this mode or not. If it sounds good, it is good. And it sounds like great advice. As far as Dave Lee Roth in college, Al's book, the chapter here for chapter 5, states that Dave just kind of treaded water until they were signed. It goes into some Dave Lee Roth quotes about how Ed and Al were putting together these phenomenal things music-wise in the orchestration classes, and that he certainly wasn't anywhere near their level. And I thought that was pretty interesting that they threw that in. And then it's interesting because within this chapter there is some fleshing out of some stuff, and then there's little drops here or there of just things that just seem to not connect. But there's some love for Doc Severinsen, who was the leader of the Tonight Show band during the Johnny Carson years. And Al gives him a lot of love, just really, and it's not long, it's only a couple sentences where he really sort of gives him props, and it just seemed to drop out of nowhere. But I thought that was interesting, so I'd mention it here. Anyways, as far as his synopsis of college, Al's for junior college, is like there were lots of awesome players there, guys that were like phenomenal. But with all that talent, what good is it if you don't apply it or use it? So what are you going to do beyond this? And I think it was just hammering home the point that they were so determined that they were going to make it no matter what. And whether they were at equal value of the musicians that were in the classes with them, or if the musicians were better, Van Halen was going to somehow come on top and sort of kind of prevail with whatever talent that they had, because they just had so much drive. Then there's some discussions about the club days, and that they had to play 45-minute sets, all top 40 music. And Al mentioned one club in Covina, Club Posh, where they'd run out of cover songs, so they started throwing their own songs in. And they figured nobody would know as long as the music kept going and going. But the club owner noticed, and he got really upset. And it's that is a story I remember Eddie Van Halen talking about years ago in various interviews, that he played too psychedelic, and that they wouldn't necessarily get the best shows because he kind of blamed himself, because he couldn't play like anybody else like himself, which turned out to be an awesome blessing because the guy was one of a kind. In terms of playing cover tunes, Al said that they wanted to play it better than everyone else, and it's tough to define better, but just have higher standards. And as far as your audience is concerned, you conduct yourself in a way where you never turn your back on them. You don't tune your guitar during the middle of a song. You make everything count. And also the spectacle, as the shows went on and they started honing their craft. Roth, of course, David Roth was a spectacle, but Eddie Van Halen ended up getting a practice World War II bomb that was hollowed out that he'd keep guitar things in there on stage so it looked cool. He kept some effects in there, echo plexes and a few other things. And Al got a second bass drum to sort of round out the spectacle. And as far as other things to add to the spectacle was the smoke show. So they'd go out and get 4F black gunpowder, put it inside of empty cat food tins, and these things would provide smoke show entertainment during the show. When you're buying the gunpowder, you're only allotted, 2 per person, and so they would strategically go in and get their allotments separate from each other, so nobody would know the difference. But they would incorporate that into the shows, and they have to be careful with ventilation because if they blew too much off, too much smoke, and people would be coughing and hacking, and it'd be a mess, which I guess must have happened several times. And they also have to be careful of things catching on fire, which he said would happen occasionally. As far as the club days, Dave had an Opel Kadett car, which is a station wagon. They pile everything in. Al goes on to talk about the backyard parties. Doesn't go into super duper detail about it. He says one had got as large as 1,000 people, and the police had to be called in. But I guess Van Halen was legendary for their backyard party playing. That was part of their circuit, I think, before they started playing clubs, or maybe concurrent with clubs. I was never too clear on that. He goes on to talk about one infamous club date at a place called Walter Mitty's, where it was like almost like a biker bar, and there was an issue on the dance floor where some guy pulls out a knife and cuts some other dude, and it was a really, really bad scene. And the Van Halen to play the next night, and there were threats that the guy that got cut or his friends were going to come back and seek retribution for it, and how nervous they were. They were going to pull their amps away from the back of the club, giving them enough space in case something went wrong. They'd run and hide behind their amps, which I thought was pretty funny. I don't know if that's much of a smart tactic, but that's one thing that was discussed. He also discusses politics, and that you don't have any politics when you are in Van Halen. You are neutral. Why would you want to divide your audience? So you never make that known. You're there as entertainment. You're there for people to get away from their everyday stuff. So no politics. He also mentions that he and Ed, when they weren't playing at a particular night, they go to a place called the Gas Company and see a band called Gold. And they always wondered, these guys play really, really well, and they play at a really nice club, and the clubs we play in are kind of dingy and not so good. Like, what's the difference? And they're always wondering what the next step for them having to take was, so that they can just continually improve. And in terms of performance again, he said that for Van Halen, they were there to provide the energy, they were there to provide the celebration, and to bring the party. That's what that was all about. So mixing spectacle with musicianship is, I think, the theme of Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 ends kind of weird. In the last paragraph or so, Al talks about at one show, right before, I don't know if they went on or they're coming off, but I guess Ed had already developed a drug habit for cocaine and snorted a PCB instead of coke, and overdosed, and on the way to the hospital, I think died, but eventually he didn't die. Obviously, he was, I guess, pronounced dead in the ambulance on the way over, but they'd made a mistake or something, and Ed kind of came along, and how lucky that wasn't the case. And that's how Chapter 5 ends. I think that part was better suited somewhere else. Should have just been completely relegated to just ethic and spectacle and musicianship and clubs and stuff like that. It was kind of a weird way to end. But anyways, that's chapter 5. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate if you made it this far. Whoa, you are a trooper. Appreciate it. I'm Elton, and this is Elton's 15. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.